This project is one where I want to install a horn relay, and I'm doing this for a few reasons. First of all, these Ford Mustangs and Cougars from 65 through 73, I don't think they ever had a horn relay, and yet I feel that they should have. And the reason for that is that the horns take about 7 or 8 amps to sound off, and that's a lot of current to send from the battery to the bottom of the steering column, up some wires into the turn signal switch area, through some brushes, some horn rings with some conductive copper pieces in there, conductive rings, all the way back down to the horns again. It's a lot of amperage, more than I'd like to see, going through a turn signal switch area. So my reason for wanting to install the horn relay is simply to offload the heavier amperage requirements for the horn and have it pass through a relay that uses a lower current, lower amperage signal wire through the steering wheel, through the steering column, to cause this to pull current from the battery through here and directly to the horns. The other reason I'm doing this is because there is a Mustang enthusiast that I've come to know in London, Canada, who had an aftermarket steering wheel on her vehicle, and every time she tried to hit the horn or turn the wheel or whatever, sparks would fly out. Well, any of us old timers who've been around long enough to try using an aftermarket steering wheel like Grant, we know that the steering wheel hubs are not made that well when it comes to handling horn circuitry. And sure enough, that's what she had. So she decided to replace the steering wheel with a factory wheel. And between myself and some other folks giving her some guidance remotely, she got the old the Grant wheel off, the Grant steering hub off, and is ready to install the steering wheel. But I cautioned her that I really thought she'd be better off putting in a horn relay, but that means someone has to show her how to do it. So here I am, I'm gonna do one so I can help her see how to do it. Now the horn relay kit I got from Rocket Man. Bob is Rocket Man, and I'll have the link in the description how you can reach him, but he's got horn relays, headlamp relays, all kinds of good stuff for electrical solutions for these cars. So a little earlier, Linda and I were doing a video on how to install these, and I ran into a couple of little problems along the way. The problems that I ran into came into being because I was trying to mount this relay using an existing hole in the radiator support bracket. Doing that, I was able to get this to mount, but it also was very hard to get the wires put on correctly. We were in very tight, confined areas between the bracket and the radiator, and having to go by feel, and that really wasn't working out very well. So I decided to take a step back to add in a step I was going to do later. That is to put a wire with an inline fuse into the power wire for the relay. And the reason for that is so that if anything goes wrong with this wire and short circuits to ground or somewhere else, there's a 20 amp fuse in here that will blow and disrupt that circuit and hopefully keep the short circuit from causing any damage. And I'm pretty big on using fuse circuits, especially aftermarket type of stuff. So we had that going on. The other thing that I had going on was this wire, power wire, wasn't really long enough to do what I wanted to do yesterday. By adding this segment, I'm going to have a better shot at getting this where I want it to be. And then the other thing I want to do is I want to put this fuse in here near the battery connection. And that's because the closer the fuse is to the source of electricity on a circuit, the better the chances of it properly protecting the circuit from damage. So, in order to do this, I need to get my wire cutters. I need to find my wire cutters. You can pause.
Oh.
Okay, Linda found my cutting strippers for wires, and I'm going to just go ahead and take a spot close to the battery end of the wire, and then I'm going to strip the wires to expose enough conductive material to install some butt end connectors. Okay, after I strip those, I twist the wires so that they stay together. Then I'm going to strip the two ends of this fuse. It doesn't take much. 3/16 of an inch is enough. I usually go a little bit more than that. Now, in order to properly protect these after I splice them together, I have some thermal shrink tube for the wires. And what these do is wherever I have a wire spliced or a terminal installed, I can take one of these plastic tubes, put it around the device that I made the splice with, and use a hot air gun to shrink this tube up, and it makes for a watertight fit. Now, in my case, I'm going to be doing something else as well. I have a bunch of butt end connectors I'm going to use to crimp onto the conductive wire. And these butt end connectors are also thermal heat shrink tubes. Now, I know there's going to be some folks watching this who are going to say, you should be using a solder joint for that. Make it a good crimp and solder it. Okay, I'm not going to argue that. Fact of the matter is, most of the connections in the automobile are crimped. So going with solder is like overkill. And it can actually cause problems if I make the wire too stiff because solder has run down. I've seen where such a joint will, in time, fracture because of wiggling stress, where the solder isn't allowing the wire to flex enough. It happens. So be it. Anyway, that's why I like to use crimping. I'm good at soldering. I've been doing soldering for decades. So here, I want to make sure I get a shrink tube that is enough diameter to fit over this. And this is only a little bit wider than the shrink tube itself. So for me, I am going to use 2 shrink wrap tubings per connection and overlap them. And that's a little bit overkill also when it comes down to making for a watertight seal. But I'm okay with that. I have a red color and I have black. Well, I'm gonna mix it up a little bit. Just for fun. No other reason. Sometimes it's reason enough to do something. I'm gonna slip the shrink tubing over one of the wires as I insert this conductive wire into the metal barrel. I'm going to spin this so it kind of spins into place. Make sure it looks good, and it sure does. You know what? These red butt end connectors are a little bit too small in diameter. So I'm not going to use them after all. I'll use the next size up, which I have a lot of also. Okay, next size up. I need to make sure the shrink wrap tube will still slide over. Nope, a little too tight. So the shrink tubing I'm going to replace also for the next size up. Go. Now the shrink tubing I use is what's called marine grade, and the reason that I use marine grade is because inside the tubes there's a heat sensitive adhesive. So when these things shrink down, the adhesive attaches to the wire insulation, and when it cools off, it makes for a watertight seal. And I dropped one.
Fall all the way through.
So I don't know if I climb around down there trying to find that one that I dropped. I'll just grab another one. No big deal. I have several kits of these kinds of shrink wrap tubes. Okay. So back under here. Back over here. And then I use my terminal pliers to crush that metal barrel where the insulation has gone into. I don't like how that feels. I'm going to re-terminate this, cut and re-terminate. It just doesn't feel right. Crush. There's a tighter one. I'm going to crush a little more, and then I pull on this just to make sure it's under solid, and this is. Then take the other end, slip on its shrink tube, and then put it into its end of the splice barrel. Then, as with the other end, I go ahead and use the terminal pliers to crush to make sure I have a good tight connection. And then I pull. I don't pull gently. If this is going to fail, I want to fail now so I have a chance to correct it. Okay, a really good look at this. I crush it just a little bit more. Now I have this done except for applying heat. I'm going to do the other side before I apply heat. The other end. before I pull, and it feels good. Then the other stripped end I put on its thermal jacket, push it down into its barrel, and crush that end also. And then I check it. That feels good. Okay. I have a heat gun over here. Now this plugs into 110 volts of power, and I have an extension up here. I need you to reach that further as you could. Can you?
Mm-hmm. I gotta get up.
Thank you. Now one would think these heat guns, because it looked like a hair dryer, you can use a hair dryer instead. I don't know about other people if they're hair dryers, but I tried that just to see, and I couldn't get the heat out of it I needed to properly shrink these shrink wrap tubes. So I'm using one that's made for this purpose. Often you'll get an attachment that has like a curved end on it that cycles the hot air. I don't know what happened to it. It's missing. So I have to do this a little differently. It gets hot in a hurry. That metal tip is still very hot, so I can't just put this down. Slide the other tube over in place. And it's done. Now that is still hot, so I'm not going to touch it until it cools off. Meanwhile, I'll start doing the other end. finally, the last piece. And it's done. Now we'll put the gun away somewhere where it would cool off without causing any grief, I hope.
Unplug it.
Yeah, unplugging I can do.
Can you do one-handed? Okay.
Okay, the cable that carries the primary power that will activate the relay, that will be activated by the relay and honk the horns, is done. I can't install it yet because there's something I've got to do first that's very important. Before we do any electrical work on an automobile, step number one is often overlooked, and it probably is the most important step and the one that will save the most money by preventing problems of all the steps you could take. That is to get battery pliers and disconnect the battery at the negative post. So I'm going to come around and do that. Battery pliers. These cars are negative ground. So it's a negative terminal. I take off the battery post. And after it's off the post, I move it into an area where it can't easily spring back and connect to that post again. Otherwise, you know, I can have problems. But while I'm over here, I'm gonna make this connection. Can you hand me that blue wire? Wait, the one I just worked on?
This one here?
Yeah. Thank you. Now I can safely work on anything electrical right now because I have taken the battery completely out of circuit. So if I'm touching a positive connection like right here, I don't have to worry about it short-circuiting to ground and burning the car down to the ground. Now this end of the power cable has an eyelet, and I'm going to attach it to the starter motor relay on the positive terminal, which connects directly to the battery positive cable. And once it's on there, I can go ahead and tighten this nut down. and secure it and all the other terminals coming off it in place. And I do have other things attached there. Now, somebody out there watching this video is probably thinking, hey, you shouldn't be using pliers. You should be using a socket wrench or a close-end wrench. Okay, you're right. But these pliers, their jaws are parallel with that size of nut for this and for battery, specifically so they don't end up stripping a nut. So for that reason, I don't mind doing it the way I just did it. Now the other thing is I'm going to need to run this wire in a way that is safe from having problems. So when I'm done running this wire and get it all hooked up, I'm going to use a plastic conduit to protect this wire. I've done the same thing with other projects. Plastic conduit here with a hot wire coming off of the starter relay. So I'll send this down and have Linda pull toward her as I feed it and see how the length is.
Ooh, nice. Depends on where you want to go, but got it all the way past where we were mounting it here before.
Okay, so I have a little bit better length now than I did before. And that's with me.
You're gonna cut that.
For right now, to keep enough length at this end of the connection, I'm gonna hook this around this hood stopper. That's not where it's going to wind up going. I'll probably end up putting the conduit around this wire, attaching it to the other conduit I have down here, and then tucking this up on the underside of the radiator support, most likely. So to do that, in a way that I don't have to unbolt these things, this is a good time for me to go ahead and start to thread the cable through the way I want it.
You're gonna pull it?
Yeah, underneath that bracket. Under, yeah. That will also give me a good idea of where I need to place the relay when I mount it. So everything over here looks pretty good. So I'm heading over there now.
Okay, cut. Go.
I was looking for a place where I could mount the new relay, where I could have a good ground and could reach most, if not all, the wires. I might have to lengthen the power wire. The forward horn is mounted with a bolt that already goes into a threaded socket hole on the inner fender. So what I'm going to do is remove that mounting bolt, which I'm doing right now, and put it through the mounting tab for the relay, then through the horn tab of the horn, and then bolt the whole thing down to the inner fender. Okay, this hole in this mounting tab is a little bit small, so I'm going to drill that out a little bit so that this bolt will slide right through. Then I can mount this where the horn is, and I can orient this. I know that Bob's instructions say to have it pointed down. I know why he says that. I don't think I can have it down. I'm not going to have it up. I'll mount it sideways. We don't drive this car unless it's dry outside, so there won't be any water getting on this. If so, it'll run off. But I'm going to do my best to position this in a way where I can get to the terminal ends for testing, for hooking it up, or whatever, and have a good ground. Okay, and you can cut.
Go.
Okay, I drilled out the mounting hole on the mounting tab for the new relay. I made sure that the bolt for mounting this on the horn, front horn, goes through. So now I've got to get this put back into place with the horn and then mount it. This is tricky because these horns are a little bit heavy. Not bad, just a little heavy and a little hard to manipulate. All I have to do is get the thread started on the bolt, and the rest will be fairly easy. Now I just got started. So I can run it down so it's finger snug. Make sure the horn mounting bracket and the relay bracket are where I want them to be. And if they are, then I cinch it down.
Before you do that,
Yeah.
did you memorize where your 1, 3, and 5 are?
Oh, I'll be able to tell.
Okay.
But yeah, that's a good thought. Make sure you know where the terminals are on the relay before tightening this thing down for real. Okay. There's a small tab on the horn mount that goes into an indexing hole. I had to line up. So this lined up. And then in order for the terminal leads to be able to fit on these tabs, I need this relay pointed down a little bit, just to make sure I have clearance from this bottle. So it looks like I'm going to have that in pretty good shape. I'm going to go ahead and tighten this down completely in the hope and belief that I have it located where I need it and want it to be. Double check. Okay. Now, the power lead is about 2 inches short.
I can move this. You
So
don't.
I'm going to have Linda unwrap that from where I had it and come at this in a different way.
You want to still go down? You want to go behind the battery or in front of?
If I need to change it, I'll unbolt it from there, but I think I can do this from here pretty good.
Okay, so I've got it draped over the battery, but you're going to move that. Okay.
So I'm going to check the documentation for where the battery power plugs in. I'm pretty sure I remember where, but I want to make double sure. Okay. There's a terminal on a relay that's pretty far away from all the other ones. And that is the one I'm after for the power. Could you hand me that lead up underneath? Thank you.
Almost got it.
Got it.
It went way down. You need 2 hands to get it in. See it?
Yeah. If the air conditioning hoses weren't in the way, this would be easy. But I like the air conditioning system, so it's going to stay. Okay, that's in place.
Hold on. I'm going to pause this.
Now there's another wire that is the original wire. And that connects to terminal number 3. And terminal number 3 is mounted closer to the center of the relay as opposed to the side.
in there now?
Gotta make some room for it.
Okay.
So what I did is I had to bend the two tabs on the end sideways a little bit so I could slide this one terminal on. And now I'm going to slide on the other terminal and straighten it out, and we should be ready to test. Should be. We will see. Now this wire is a whole lot longer than it has to be, so I'll coil it up later. I'm going to make sure I'm plugging what I want in there. Number one.
Not enough room to do it. The plug is longer than the distance, isn't it?
I'm just coming at, there we go, at an angle it's not used to. Okay, everything's plugged in.
Battery.
But the battery's not connected yet. So, I'm going to go to the other side of the car, hook the battery back up. Then we'll see if this thing goes beep. I'll be right back. I have the negative cable connected to the battery again and tightened down. I have not yet finished with the wiring. I still have to clean that up and put it inside a conduit and wrap up some of the loose wiring on the other side. But I'm ready for Linda to go in and press the horn button on the steering wheel on either of the two spokes, and we'll see if this thing beeps. Well, today I am going to be working on the 73 Mach 1, and the project at hand was supposed to be pretty easy, where I was going to install a horn relay so I could send a lower amperage current up through the steering wheel column into the steering wheel brushes and ring set to the back of the steering wheel. And I initially was going to use the horn relay sold by Rocket Man, and I will provide his website in the description of this video. I had chosen to install his relay in an area that had very limited space. It was going to go down where the forward horn is, using that horn's mounting bolt to secure the mounting tab. Now this mounting tab and housing has to be grounded. So it was such a tight fit, I had to bend the terminal tabs. Now this isn't something he suggests. I'm going to be fair about that. It's what I decided to mount it. Had I wanted to be less invasive, I would have mounted it somewhere along the radiator bracket out of the way. But no, I did this. And when I bent these tabs, I felt one remove a little bit, and I think I ended up damaging the wiring on the inside of the relay. So it did not work, even though I had it hooked up correctly. When I applied control current to it to make the relay activate, there's no clicking, nothing. So I think I broke it. So what I did then is I picked up another relay from a local store, because I wasn't about to tell Bob, hey, that's a bad relay, send me another one. You know, that was not fair. I broke it. So I picked up another relay. It didn't work, but for a different reason. This one, rather than sending current out, waited for current to come in to ground it. So it was basically acting as a relay in reverse direction of what was needed. So that didn't work. So now I put together my own hodgepodge of relay socket on wiring. And in this video, I'm going to have Linda record how I put this whole thing together, and hopefully this time I get something that works. Now, for those folks who don't want to go out and buy all their own parts and assemble it from scratch like I'm about to, you can always get the unit from Rocket Man. He has a great reputation for having good equipment. Just don't try to mount the relay somewhere that is going to cause problems getting the terminals to plug in like I did. That was not a good thing to do. Anyway, with that, I'm going to cut this video at this point and have Linda pick it up as soon as I'm ready to start to do my work. With any kind of work that is to be done to an electrical system, you should always, step one, remove the negative battery cable from the battery. Now I'm using a special kind of pliers called battery terminal pliers. And by taking the negative terminal off the battery negative post, you essentially have killed the entire electrical system. So if accidentally you have a positive current contact ground somewhere, it's not going to cause problems with the electrical circuit. So that's where I begin. Okay, you can cut. With the original horn relay kit I got from Rocket Man, Bob, he provided in his kit some really nice wiring with some nice insulated spade terminal connectors. So I'm going to be using his wire everywhere I can as I add in an inline fuse for the power supply for the relay, and for the circuitry from the relay to the horns themselves, I'm going to add a fuse on one and a fusible link on the other. And I got two different kinds of fuse safety equipment pieces because, well, I ordered another online fuse, turned out to be a fusible link. I only ordered one, so I went to go pick up what I ordered, and gee, I need two of those, and they didn't have another fusible link, so I got another fuse for the horn circuit protection. Now, that is being a little bit excessively cautious, wanting to put the protection in for the horn circuit wiring, because quite frankly, there really isn't much opportunity for that wiring to be damaged and to cause a problem. But I'm just trying to be careful. Anyway, I'm going to start by saying that I cut off the terminal end of Bob's wire, and I'm going to attach it to the other end of this fused wire using a butt end connector that is shrink wrapped with its design, plus I'm going to put my own shrink wrap around it. So some folks think that's like wearing belts, suspenders, and a staple gun to hold up someone's pants. I'm being excessively cautious, and yes, I am. I'm also going to do something else. Originally, this terminal from Bob had been enshrouded with insulating rubber near the metal here, and earlier I took that off when I was doing some testing when I was trying to do my relay installation, and I had to use a test light. So I'm going to put on some more protective shielding on here like he had, and for that I'm going to use some shrink wrap tubing, but not just any shrink wrap tube. The type that I get is what they call marine grade. So it will work with water or wet environment type situations, which we don't run into when we start to play with these automobiles, unless you splash into mud and water and stuff. But the difference is this shrink wrap tubing inside has a thermally active adhesive, and when you apply the heat to have the shrink wrap tubes tighten up, it melts that adhesive, and that adhesive is then spread around inside the tubing to further protect the connection from water or other corrosive material intrusion. So I'm going to go ahead and do that here. First thing I'm going to do is I've already stripped the wire here and here. So now to prepare for the connections, there's a shrink wrap I'm going to use for this particular wire. For this end, I'm going to use a little smaller diameter shrink wrap, I hope. There, this will work. And I'm going to simply put it up over some of the metal base of that eyelet. It's a little longer than I need, so I'm going to cut it a little shorter. And the cut off piece I'm going to save to use later, because every once in a while I have a situation like this where the original length of the shrink wrap is longer than I really need. So I'll put this on and shrink it down. Now to shrink it down, I use a heat gun. Now this looks like a hair dryer, but it gets a lot hotter. You don't want to use this to dry your hair. You end up catching on fire. And often these will come with a device that loops the blown air back onto itself like a little hook. I'm not finding mine. I don't know where it is. So I'm gonna go ahead and use this straight up the way that it discharges the air and be done with it. Now the other thing I have to be careful of is that hot air is really, really hot. So I'm going to use a pair of pliers to hold this as I heat up the shrink wrap for the terminal. High heat, here we go. I'll let this cool off. Meantime, there's a close-up.
Oh, I got it.
There's a close-up of how that turned out. Now, the heat wrap tube I put on here originally to prepare it slipped off and fell
down.
So I've got to get another one. I'll find that one someday, laying underground somewhere. Meanwhile, I'll get a heat shrink button connector to connect those two wires. Now, there are a lot of people who feel these joints ought to all be soldered. Well, that doesn't really hurt anything, but frankly, the manufacturers rely upon crimp fittings, so I don't see where I'm doing any harm doing the same thing. That, and sometimes putting solder into the equation can actually cause a problem, because now we have stiffness at the end of a wire that shouldn't be there, and we could end up getting stress fracturing in the wire itself, which will cause electrical failures down the road. So I use these crimp-ons. I like the ones with the plastic shields around them. That also that's too small. That also shrink when heat is applied to them. I get one that fits. I will. Here we go. Now the wire ends, I twist before I insert them. Crimp, re-crimp. Now I test by pulling, and if it's gonna fail, I want to fail now, not later. Now, in order to shrink this tubing without causing problems with the black shield I'm putting on here, I'm going to go ahead and shrink them together. The heat will transfer through. No, actually, I'm gonna shrink them separate. I want them done separate. So I have to be very careful not to hit this tubing with this hot area. I want to only apply it right here to the butt end connector. Now, if you take a look, you'll see how that one end I heated up shrank down a lot. What I should have done is I should have cut the length of this heat tubing in half. So I'm going to do that now so I can properly shrink it on top of both ends, because this is not quite long enough to get both ends. And I don't need the center part done. So I will carefully snip this tubing the way I don't end up cutting the wire itself. But now I will have two different ends of shrink wrap tube I can use to make sure I have these on solid. Okay, I'm gonna put this on now. On the same end I just shrank up. Let it heat up. And here I go. Now I'm going to heat up the other end of the butt connector. So it will shrink up. Let that cool off for a few moments. Then I'll slide this button connector inside of this other part of the shrink wrap tubing, and then I'll complete the job. Okay, that end is done. Now inside this little hood, I have a small 15 amp ATM blade fuse. ATM is the micro size, not the ATC regular size. So it's a little bit smaller than what you find in a lot of fuse panels on cars. I already have it connected to the rest of the wire that Bob provided with this kit with the insulated terminal end, but it turns out this isn't quite as long as I wanted previously. I think it'll be long enough now for I'm planning to put this relay. If not, then I will re-terminate and put in a section of wire in here, but I'm not going to do it quite yet because I think I'll be okay. So what did I do different as opposed to Bob's kit? First of all, I want to reiterate the horn relay kit that Bob sells as Rocket Man is a fine kit. I've used his equipment before. I just happened to cause a problem with the relay he sent me by trying to alter it a little bit. But for this project, I'm doing something a little bit more complex. I'm going to use a relay that is normally used for things like electric cooling fans like we have on this Mach 1. Take a look, you see I don't have a mechanical fan, I have two electric fans, and they are managed with a thermal controller, thermostat, and with a 40 amp relay, what is called a Bosch terminal design. And here's a close-up of what the terminals look like. One of them gets connected to ground. One gets connected to the trigger voltage that activates the relay. Another goes to positive current source power. And another one or two go to what would be called the load, or in this case, the horns. So they have on the back of this relay a quick diagram of how it gets connected with the terminal positions on the relay. I also have to plug that relay into a relay socket. And the relay socket is set up with socket terminals that match the spade terminals we find on this relay. And it plugs in, I'm not going to plug it in completely just because it's a pain. It plugs in like so, except it goes all the way in. There are some designs that are water resistant, where there's more of a socket around the outside of the perimeter of the relay. I couldn't find one in stock anywhere, so I went with this. We don't drive this Mach 1 unless the roads are dry and the weather is clear, so I'm not expected to have water intrusion issues. So, now that I have this, it's time for me to figure out which color wire from this socket gets connected where. The first thing I want to do is find out which is the ground. It doesn't say very clearly. Where did I put the box for that? Is it? Yeah. Okay, what I have done is I have connected a diagnostic power switch so that I can apply power or take away power from the relay at will. And there you see a light coming off and going on. That's because I'm pressing this button. So now that I know I have current coming through from the battery after I press a switch, I will hook up the two leads to the new relay. The green wire is power going to ground. The blue wire is control or trigger voltage. So when I trigger this, you should hear, I hope you can hear it, a clicking. Let me have Linda come closer so you can hear it, because I can definitely hear it. Every time I push a button and it clicks on, that is when it will send current from the battery to the horns. So that's what that is doing. So now that I have shown that mechanically the relay works, I'm going to go ahead and connect up the other leads. So I take this test switch out of circuit, put it to one side. Now for the blue and green wire, this is where things get a little tricky. Green wire goes to ground. What I'm going to do is get an eyelet terminal that this bolt can go through, and when I mount the horn, it should ground this. This I will connect to the old horn circuit. When a person pushes a horn switch at the steering wheel, it sends power normally to the horns. Well, I want the power to go here. That will make this relay trigger. And then the relay manages power from the battery going to the horns. So the trick is going to be finding the right size terminal without dropping the whole box. You can cut. So I have my shrink wrap tubing. I found an eyelet terminal, and with that, I'm going to slide the shrink wrap down onto the green wire. Make sure I've twisted the wires together. Put on the yellow terminal. And then crimp. And then I will pull. That's why I test it that way, by pulling, to make sure I don't end up having something that slides off. This slid off. I didn't crimp it properly, or I got too large a connector for the gauge wire.
May I want this one here?
So I'm going to get another terminal. So let's go ahead and cut. Okay, I got a better size terminal for this gauge wire. The other one was too large, but I wanted to have a big enough eyelet for the bolt to go through. Well, I did some more digging and I found what I needed. So we'll just go ahead and try this again. Crimp. Crimp again. And let's see if this comes off. Nope, that's good. So before I shrink wrap this reddish tube, I'm going to shrink wrap the terminal installations first. Let it warm up a little bit. And here we go. So that looks pretty good, nice and tight, but this is going to make it even better. Shrink wrap tubing in place, let it warm up. There we go. Now we have a good ground terminal. Now, for the blue end, I need to get a spade terminal to put on here so I can slip it into the connector that the horn circuit normally would plug into the horns with. It uses a spade socket. And you can cut for a moment. I found a spade terminal, and I have another heat shrink tube. So I now go to the blue wire, which is for trigger current or control current. Put the spade terminal on. Crimp it. And then I'll pull it to make sure it's not coming off. And then I'll shrink wrap this down and then put the tube in place and shrink wrap that one. Let it warm up. That's nice and tight. And warm it up again. And that is nice and secure. Now, we next have this that connects to the power from the battery. The one end will go onto the starter relay positive terminal, which has an alligator clip on it right now. The other end has a spade socket. So I could either put on another spade terminal, like I just did for the control voltage, and simply plug those in, or I could clip this and use a butt end connector and make it a more permanent type of connection. The upside to doing the spade terminal is it makes it really easy to do and undo. That's also the downside. It's possible it could come undone at some point, although it's not likely. I'm going to see how fast I can find a spade terminal. If I can't find one fast enough, I use a butt end connector and cut. The size wire, so I'm going to cut off the spade socket terminal. Oops.
Yeah, I'm gonna cut that.
Okay, so I found the correct size spade terminal. And I'm going to take the yellow power supply wire from the relay socket and strip it. Twist the wires. Put on the shrink wrap tubing sleeve. And then twist on the spade terminal onto the wire, and then I'm going to crimp it. And then I'll pull on it solid. I'll let this warm up and I'll do the same thing. Shrink wrap it in place and then do the shrink wrap tube. Okay, I'll let that cool off. Now, on the load side, we have a red wire. And that needs to plug into the horn wire circuit, which was supplied by Bob, and it has one spade socket here and one that I've already connected to the horn. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look for another spade terminal to plug into this and put it also on the red wire after I strip it, of course. You can cut. I have finished up most of the terminal crimps I had to do off camera, but I thought I'd do this last one on camera, trying to show you specifically how I do this. So I've already stripped this wire of insulation, and I've already twisted the wires together. And I have a heat shrink tube I've already put down the wire, and this terminal end needs to be a spade terminal. So I put that on the wire. I twist as I put it in place. That way I am really sure to get all the way down the conductive wire material. And then once I have it down as far as I can get it, I go ahead and I crimp the small collar crimp it hard, move it a little bit, crimp a little more, and then I always pull to make sure it's under. I don't do any movement between the wire and the conductive spade terminal. Now I'm going to use the heat gun to shrink down this plastic cover. After that, I'll put this other shrink wrap tube over there and shrink this down as well. Now this gets really hot, so I'm going to keep my fingers away from where I'm working. Let it warm up a few moments. You might see some red hot inside there. If you don't, I'll show you in a moment. It gets red hot.
I see.
Now that's in place, and I put this on top, then shrink it down. Now put the heat gun somewhere safe where the tip doesn't get anything melted or burned. And there it is. Now it's a little hot to handle right now, so I'm gonna let it cool off. But what I have now, I have this part that goes to the horn wiring. I've got this part which comes from the horn switch, which acts as the control or the trigger voltage. I have horn switch trigger. This goes to ground, green. And this I have set up to go to the power from the battery. This orange wire is not used in our application. It is like a second output to load. So what I'm going to do to make sure it never has a problem, I'm going to strip this back and put a butt-end connector on here and shrink it down where there's nothing connecting at the other end. That way, nothing will ever get in there and trip this by getting it grounded accidentally. You know, I might even be able to do that a little differently if I could find my large yellow butt-end connectors. Nope, I don't see them. I could have.
Why can't you just seal the sealant type things, shrink them on top without a connector on it?
That's what I'm going to do. But I'm thinking if I were to crimp the insulation, it'd make it even safer. But yeah, the way I had mine initially and what you recommend are perfectly good. Spin this down and then crimp it real good. I'll move it up a little bit on the collar, crimp it some more. It's under good and stable. Run the collar down or the shrink tube down first, and then I'll heat that puppy up with no wire in the other end. shrink up the other ends, close it up. So that tubing where there's no wire shrank up really, really small. But I'm going to do more. So I'll put this in place. And then I'll hit the shrink tube and I'll seal that thing off completely. Now that glue inside is still warm and pliable. So while it's pliable, I'm going to squeeze off this end to make absolutely sure that it is sealed and stays sealed. So I'll hold it till it cools off. I'll release it, and then this is going to be absolutely sealed off from anything electrical. So I won't have any possibility of a ground or short unless something comes along and hits the wire insulation and cuts it. In that case, that's why I have all these fuses in place. Okay, if you look very carefully, you see some of the adhesive glue from inside the tube squeezed out. At the very tip, it's translucent, it's almost transparent. Looks like clear plastic, and that's what it is. That's the sealant inside these tubes that adhere to everything inside when I heat shrink them. And that's what helps make these things waterproof where they clamp down. It's a water resistant adhesive. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to start hooking this up initially, only temporarily. I'm not going to route anything permanently, make it pretty yet, because I still have to put in the horn wiring. I'm going to put in their fusible link and their fuse to protect the horn circuit, and that's going to take a few minutes. I'll do that off screen. And I want to make sure that this functions the way it's supposed to before I start wrapping everything up in plastic conduit and making it look nice. Okay, when I get done hooking this up, we'll get back online and we'll test it live. Live fire exercise.
Holding on to power.
Whether it works or not, this goes in the video.
It works.
It works. Okay, now I'll go ahead and I'll make this all nice and pretty. And I'll show you the end result when I'm done. But for now, I'm going to put some things away that we don't need anymore now that we have the relay working. Woohoo! Okay, we are back working on the Mach 1. I had temporarily wired in the relay into the different wiring harness locations on the car and tested the horn with one horn only attached, and it worked. So now what I'm going to do is connect up these different terminals a bit more, I'm going to call it permanently, but detachable permanently, where I can take it apart easily if I have to, as opposed to wire shrink wrapping all the connections that I'll be making from here on out. And you'll see why in a moment or two. After I have all this put away, have the front horn secured, because right now it's unbolted, and have this stuffed away somewhere where it's out of the way, but easy to get to if I have to, then I'm going to go ahead and use some of this plastic conduit. Now, some of you folks might have seen this kind of stuff before, some of you haven't. But this is plastic conduit made to put wires into, and it's made by Dorman. Now, I have found this product in different sizes in different parts stores. I got ours from AutoZone, but I'm sure that O'Reilly's has it and other places as well. Going to cut for a moment. After all the wiring is put away in the areas I wanted, I'm going to take some of this plastic conduit and use it to put around the different wires to do two things. First of all, it makes things look better instead of having a bunch of wires laying around different colors. Everything is inside this conduit. The other reason is in the event any other wire happens to start rubbing on the surface, especially metal, this will protect the insulation from rubbing through real quick. Now I'm going to try to avoid potential problems like that, but sometimes it just happens. Anyway, the manufacturer or reseller of this is Dorman, D-O-R-M-A-M. And this plastic conduit I have found at several different parts stores. I got ours from AutoZone, but I'm pretty sure O'Reilly's has it, Action Auto, other places. And it comes in different diameters. This one is 3/8 of an inch. I think they have a 1/2 inch and a 3/4. I have some larger stuff for bigger harnesses, but this is a small harness with only a couple of wires I'm dealing with. So I'll clean things up, and then I'll be using little black wire ties to secure the conduit so it doesn't just flop around, and also to try to hold together some of the wired connections I'm going to make. For instance, this yellow spade terminal. Could you get that for me? Thank you. Will be pushed into this other wire that's going to carry battery power, and it pushes in just fine, but it also comes out pretty easily. So I'm going to attempt to use one of those wire ties to hold this together so I can take it apart if I have to by cutting the wire tie, or I can just leave it alone. It's on the conduit, and I'll be confident that everything's going to work out fine. Now, the other option I have, if I have enough length on the wire, is to simply fold this over on itself and wire tie this down so that this bend is going to hold the position of this spade socket, and the wire tie will hold the spade terminal in the socket. And that might be the cleaner way to do it. I just haven't decided which way I'm going to go yet, but I think I'm starting to decide right now. So anyway, that's what I'm up to. And this is not rehearsed. I have never done this with this particular type of upgrade before. So whatever time it takes, it takes. I just hope I have enough batteries so you can see the end result. Wire tie, fold it over. Yeah, I think I like this better, where the wire tie simply holds everything kind of together.
Now you'll need the bigger thingy.
Oh, I think this will still fit inside the conduit.
Okay.
We'll find out. Okay, so now when it comes to running this conduit with this power lead, I am going to simply go along the underside of this radiator support. And it's going to be kind of hanging loose between this and the other upper radiator support and wire tied onto there. So it's for someone looking for perfection, they're not going to see it. I'm not going to try to tuck it up underside this bracket, because then I've got to deal with looking for holes I can use to put wire ties through to hold it up in place. I'm not worried about that. I just want it out of the way and someone has to see it, something that's not ugly. Okay, so, well, I've already shot myself in the foot. No, I didn't. I know I can do this. I'll just drag this power all the way over here, and I'll start moving it down toward Linda. Okay, keep pulling. Oh yeah, underneath. And keep pulling until I tell you. I don't mind having a little extra length out there. A little more. That's good. Okay. So now, what I'll do is I'll have Linda hold one end of the small conduit, and I will cut the length I think I need.
Going to go to here, right?
Yeah. We'll go and match up the length of that. Wow, I did pretty good. I think I'm going to leave it the length it is uncut, which it has been cut before. So what I'll do is I'll steal this back away from Linda, and then from this end, there's a lengthwise slit cut in the conduit plastic. And all I'm going to do is slip the wire inside there and start to work it down toward her. And it seems to go pretty quick at first, but then all of a sudden, surprise, it comes popping apart before you know it. And that's not any fun for anybody. Oh, you know, Linda mentioned I might have to use some of the larger conduit for this. Turns out she's right. So I'll send this down as far as I can on this one segment, and then I'll wire tie it so it looks pretty decent. Well, this is going so slow, I might as well just go ahead and have this go off camera so I can wrap this up and show you the results later, because this is going to burn up a lot of recording time and I don't want to bore anybody. So we'll cut here and I'll be back. Well, I am back working on this horn relay project after about a 2-week hiatus, as it turned out, because the weather was getting colder and I kept waiting for it to get warmer. It didn't, and now I'm 1 day away from Linda and I heading out for a 2-week vacation. So I thought I'd better wrap this up. So anyway, what I ran into when I knocked off last time is I finished wiring in most of the relay for the horn. But I ran into an issue with the wire that is used to send the horn switch voltage to the trigger wire for the relay, and then for the outbound power from the relay going to the two horns. So what I ended up doing is that the spade terminals from the relay that I had crimped on weren't being held very tightly with the spade socket. First for the two wires going to the two horns, and then also for the horn switch output that acts as the trigger for the wire for the relay. So I don't know if you can see this very well, but I took the male spade terminals and I used a small pair of crimping pliers to basically put a small little bend in the end of the terminal wires. And when I did that, that allowed me to push this into the spade sockets, and now they're being held very securely. So securely that I don't feel a need to do anything more to help secure them. Now I have an extra orange wire here from the relay. That is a second load wire. I don't need to use it, so I basically put a heat shrink tube over the end, and then I heated it up real hot to shrink it, and when it's still hot, I use pliers to pinch off the end, so now I have a fully insulated end that is not going to cause any problems. So that's what I'm going to do. So I'm going to use those as they are, and then I'm going to put a little more conduit around some of these wires to kind of hide them, make them look better. But when it comes time what to do, comes time to say what I'm going to do about this relay, I could go ahead and try to find a way to mount this, but it's okay if this is just hanging loose. So I think I'm going to do is I'll put some conduit around some of these wires to make it look prettier, and then I use wire ties to basically wire this up against the same harness, the same conduit containing the wires, just to keep it out of the way. But that should be fine. It does not have to be grounded because it has through and through voltage. No ground needed for the shield, which is good because it's plastic anyway. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and then I'll come back with another video showing how that turned out. And then I can call it a day after I test it, of course. All right. I have finished it enough. This conduit leads over to the battery, or actually positive terminal. I'll show that a little more in a bit. And then it leads down to the wiring harness that I have spliced the horn relay into. Now, I said earlier I didn't have to ground this case. That's true. What I did have to ground is this green wire. I did that the other week when I connected it down to the bolt that holds the one horn in place. Everything else I wire tied up and put in a conduit, except the ground wire, and this blue and white wire is a very hard shell plastic. I have it going down near the frame. I have a wire tie holding it in place. Then it comes up and goes behind this rear horn and eventually plugs into the horn. That's the wire that is sent from the relay to the red wire out of the relay that then feeds the wire that is split off to feed both horns. Well, basically I ran out of conduit of the right size, so I'm going to leave that the way it is. And over here, I'm going to take this little relay and just shove it down here, out of the way. It's not going to go anywhere. It's not doing anything that's moving. It'll work just fine. Speaking of working, there is, of course, something I forgot to do. I have, on the other end of the car, from the power cable that feeds the relay, an inline fuse in case something goes wrong with the power wire, it grounds or shorts, it'll pop the fuse. I had intended to take the red wire from the horn relay before it went in and fed the wire that then ends up feeding the two horns. I was going to put another inline fuse in for that second circuit. I forgot. So I'm not going to go cut that whole thing apart, especially out here in a cold garage. I'm going to leave it the way it is. There is already a fuse in the circuit that feeds the trigger side of the relay. Is part of the automobile wiring, so it's already protected. So for me to use this circuit break or the circuit fuse would have been like wearing a belt and suspenders and taking a staple gun to nail the pants to my hips. It keeps the pants from falling down, but it really isn't necessary. So I'm going to leave it as is. I'm going to go and tie the other end down so it stays nice and secure. And then I'm going to call this project done. All right, I'm on the other side of the car where the battery is. Way in that far side of the radiator, between the radiator and the radiator support, there is a conduit like this that wraps the wire that leads to the horn relay, and it terminates in a circle end. Now this has already been all cinched down and heat shrink tube wrapped and everything. So what the objective now is to route that behind the battery, then up over to the starter relay, and then I will loosen this nut, take it off, and I'll put that end here onto that terminal and bolt it down. And with that, this project will be done. And here is that inline fuse I was mentioning earlier that I have to protect the circuit that feeds the horn relay, the load electrical circuit. So I'll get that done. I'll show it on the video, and then for sure it'll be done. All right. From the driver's side, I've got the conduit running all the way over to this part of the radiator support, down tucked down back behind the battery. And then I have it going down. See where the fuse holder is? Right here. And then I have it bolted into the starter relay heavy current positive terminal. It's all bolted down and ready for action. And when I get to the side of the car, I'll turn the video back on and honk the horn. So you see it'll work, and it should work because both battery terminals are on and tightened down. Now I'm going to, for the rest of winter, put this car on a small battery tender to keep the battery fully charged throughout the winter, because we won't be driving this for another 5 months at least. Okay, I'm at the driver's side of the door. Everything's plugged in, and this should now honk. There you go, first time go, at least today.